Hello everyone and welcome to the Green Man channel. Hope you're doing good and well. So it's time for a new album review this Sunday, and it is a big one because I'm a big fan of Steven Wilson, and he has just released his 8th solo studio album titled The Overview, and this was released on Friday the 14th of March via Fiction Records. And the album is made up of 2 extended tracks, or 2 suites if you will, and that makes up a total of 42 minutes in length. So I am a big fan of Steven Wilson, both in the context of Porcupine Tree and with his solo studio albums too. And, I think he's consistently very good, or, if there's an album I like less, I tend to still have a level of respect for it as well. So I was very intrigued by this album and its idea, that being of the overview effect, the effects that astronauts get apparently when they're looking back on the Earth from space and getting a sort of a different perspective on humanity. And I have to say, one thing that I will say straight away about this album is I think it does that brilliantly. It captures almost a philosophy or an outlook and translates it into music, and you can feel that with all the different progressions that are going on. This is an album which I feel at times doesn't necessarily reach the big climaxes that some of his previous albums do, like Hand Cannot Erase, for example, but it does kind of beautifully often segue from progression to progression. I do really enjoy the build-ups here, actually, quite often, and the build-ups are sometimes so good that you kind of feel like there could be a slightly more fitting climax. But the more I listen to this record, the more I'm enjoying it, the more I'm appreciating it, the more I appreciate it actually from an overall in an overall kind of wholesome way, which perhaps is deliberate. This is not meant to be an album, I think, which is like a collection of songs with, choruses and verses that you necessarily going to immediately remember. Saying that, actually, some of the parts that stood out to me immediately on this record were Steven Wilson's vocal musings, where he's talking about the trivialities of everyday life and, sort of putting a spin on that versus what's happening in space and in the cosmos at large. So an example of this is actually when in Objects Outlive Us, he's saying, and meanwhile the stars line themselves up in order while we bicker on with our fences and borders, as just an example of, of that. I am reminded a bit of albums by the likes of King Crimson here, perhaps the Islands album a little bit. It also reminds me a lot of Porcupine Tree's The Sky Moves Sideways. It has that sort of a vibe, a sort of feel of drifting around, sort of dreaming and thinking about things and contemplating, really kind of grand ideas and those moments where we're reflecting. I mean, this is that kind of a record. I actually also really enjoy a lot of the guitar work on here, the King Crimson-esque, the more frenetic moments where you get almost like kind of jazzy, jazzy guitar build-ups and things like that. They're very Robert Fripp-like, that I really enjoyed as well on the album. And there's also in Objects Outlive Us, there's a really beautiful come down, when you've had all of that kind of, quite manic guitar part in the album or on that particular piece, and then it sort of transitions into this beautiful ambient moment where Steven first of all sings in falsetto, I incline myself to space, and then he sings There Was No Ghost on the Moor, and then he sings No Open Window in this really echoey sort of floating way. And that moment, that sort of change in the synth and that atmospheric moment, I find to be really haunting and really beautiful. So to kind of get towards a summary here, I really love the first suite, Objects Outlive Us. I think it's a stunning display of prog rock. It won't be for everyone because it's very, very journeying, and not everyone will be satisfied that there are, people will want more of those kind of Steven climax, maybe even having Nina Tayeb, who's guest vocaled on Steven's previous works. I feel like she was maybe missing a little bit on this record because she often provides those big climactic vocal moments on his previous albums for me. But there's still really good things here for the most part. I think I didn't like the second suite quite as much. I felt like the vocal spoken word moments broke up that track a bit too much for me, and the different parts therefore didn't connect as well together. But I did love the saxophone solo at the end from Theo Travis. I thought that was great. So, you know, I do feel like this concept is very well geared towards progressive rock, and I think Steven Wilson has done a really good job. My heart wants to give this album like a 9 or a 10 out of 10, but I honestly don't think I have quite enjoyed this as much as A Hand Could Not Erase or The Raven That Refused to Sing. I'm feeling much more of, I think, an 8 to an 8.5, but given how much I appreciate this and what it does, and that I am connecting to this record, I do like this idea, and I do think that everybody sometimes needs to take a moment to realise that there's the great cosmos out there. There are things we don't know. Sometimes humanity is, the egos that go on in the world. We shouldn't go into that too much, but at the moment anyway, it's a whole other thing that I don't need to really talk about here. But it's nice sometimes to just contemplate, get a bit of perspective on things, because I think we could all do that sometimes in our lives. And I really enjoyed this record, so I'm giving it an 8.5 out of 10. Hope you enjoyed this review, everybody. If you enjoy my content, you like my reviews, do drop a like and a sub. I always really appreciate when it happens. Otherwise, until next time, everybody, it's bye for now.